Welcome to SSON's AP Automation Digital Summit. Naomi Secor here with the SSON, and I am excited to be your host. More than ever, AP is quickly becoming a critical strategic partner to the business, and as such, there is an urgent shift to a more contemporary, digitally savvy, AI and data-driven accounts payable function. So let's talk about how we do that. This next session is all about turning your AI tool from a one-hit wonder to an evergreen. This is the BASF case study, and we are very happy for this to be sponsored by our good friends at Insiders Technology. We had great questions in the last session. Let's keep that going. Please use the Q&A box and add your questions as they come up. We're going to address them. Also visit the Resource Center. Insiders Technology has provided several pieces of interesting content. There's a white paper on P2P processes in the cloud and several more information about this case study you're about to hear. So joining us today, we have Dr. Katalin Beledics, who's a senior process expert for AP at BASF Services Europe. He joined the European Shared Services Center in 2010. And as P2P Finance Senior Process Expert, she coordinates AP process optimization, digitization, automation measures in BASF's global P2P community. And her background's truly impressive. You can read more about her on the console. And we have Christian Volkerman, who's the head of sales at Insiders Technology. In 1998, he started his business career as a management consultant at Roland Berger Strategy Consultants in Munich. His focus has always been on business process optimization and automation. And in 2004, he joined Insiders Technology. So to the both of you, thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naomi. A very warm welcome also from my side. It's a great pleasure to be here today and have the opportunity to contribute this summit for the second time. I'm not quite sure if any of you have participated last year, but just allow me to briefly refer to our last year presentation where we shared some insights with you on our project that we conducted together with Insiders Technologies, and we implemented a very, very good software of Insiders Technologies using AI. And today we would like to share with you some insights how we are turning this successful project from a one-hit wonder to an evergreen. Let me please briefly recap the key messages of our last year presentation to be sure that we have a very clear starting point. BASF, I believe many of you have heard of the chemical company. We are an international company with more than 100,000 employees. We create chemistry for a sustainable future. Last year, we generated sales of 78 billion euros. Our global business services are bundled in 3 service hubs in Berlin, Montevideo, and Kuala Lumpur. And you might have seen our motto: we understand, we empower, we excel. It was already shared by our Senior Vice President, Daniel Dornbusch, in one of the SSON events last November. I would like just to briefly explain what we mean by empower, because it's an important information to be able to really understand our use case. We are a competency-based service organization. This also means that our employees are part of the service delivery, and at the very same time, they are also part of our continuous improvement process. So each and every employee is asked for ideas and input feedback, how to further automate and optimize our processes. For P2P Finance, it also means that process governance is with us in GBS. If it comes to the project, as mentioned, it was about implementing Insiders Technologies Smart Invoice software, which is an OCR and data extraction application using AI. This is a cloud application that we could easily connect with our ERP system, which is running on-premise. And with this project, we could materialize significant efficiency gains because we were able to significantly reduce processing times in the OCR and data extraction tool, and at the very same time to increase automation rates in our SAP system.
Thank you, Katalin, for the look back. Let me ask you a very simple question now, and obviously we all know the answer looking at the headline of this presentation, but is that the end of the story? Have you reached your automation goals yet?
Of course, no. We are continuously driving and seeking for continuous improvement, right? This is important because the environment we are working in does change continuously. We have significant changes in our invoice portfolio. There are new vendors in our portfolio and vendors with long-term relationship with a very significant amount of transactions. We move from PDF to EDI, for example, and therefore also the structure of our portfolio is changing. And of course, in a service organization, we also face a lot of organizational changes. So experienced colleagues develop, move to other positions, and we onboard newcomers. We have to train them very properly to ensure that they use the tool in a way the tool is expected to be used. And with that, we can then exploit the full potential of the application. But it's a difficult work. And Christian, I wanted to ask you, do you have a solution for us how to drive these measures?
Yeah, where to get started? That's a very good question. And in the last presentation last year, we had our focus on AI and smart invoice and OCR and extracting data out of invoices. And today the focus will be a little bit different. Let me start with a pretty famous quote of Mr. Peter Drucker, one of the most famous management consultants in the past. You can't manage what you don't measure. So obviously you want to manage your automation goals, you want to increase efficiency, you're looking at cost, but in order to manage that, you have to measure first. The question is what to measure, and especially in the area of accounts payable, of AP automation, there is so much that you can measure. You can measure processing times, you can measure extraction rates, you can measure automation rates, you can drill down to vendors, to fields, to countries, to regions, to booking codes. But to efficiently do that, you need a tool. And the tool that we are proposing for that and that we are using in the joint efforts we are doing here is called Smart Act. I think the name is pretty much self-explaining. Act like go to action, act, improve your automation rates, just do it. The real name behind Smart Act actually is the Smart Automation Cockpit. So that is a tool that we provide to our customers and that we are using in our joint project for quite a while now. And that tool gives you all the data that measures everything that you need in order to manage your automation rates. And talking about that tool, there is like 3 dimensions that you can look at. The first dimension, and I think that's the most important one, is always look into the past and learn. And you already had that on your previous slide, learning. Learn from what happened last week, last month, last year, and come to conclusions out of that. The second step is monitor what is going on right now, and is there changes to the daily business? Is there like a discrepancy in service levels? Are you not reaching service levels anymore? And the most important step, of course, and that leads to the managing part of the tool, is the analytics. What can you learn from the data that you have just analyzed, that you have just been presented? Is there like cost drivers? Is there things that jump into the eye and that basically tell you this is an area for improvement? So that's the 3 dimensions of the tool, Smart Act, and that's the tool and the lessons learned we are going to talk about in this presentation. And maybe, Katalin, let's start with the use case that you were looking at and how we dealt with that.
All right, let's look at the first example from our daily business. On the left side, you see an invoice. In the middle, you see the user interface of Smart Invoice, and you see the fields marked green and others marked blue. The green ones are the ones where the data extraction happened completely automatically and with a very high confidence. So the user shouldn't really check these fields, but just work on the blue fields that require manual intervention. And sometimes it's really hard to understand, especially if we see so simple invoices like this one, why we do need long processing times. Obviously, we have some people who do not really trust the machine and they do not want to compromise on quality. So therefore, they go through each and every field to make sure they process the invoice correctly. But is it really true that we would compromise on quality if we would just work on the blue fields?
And that is a very good question. And actually now we're coming back to AI and distrusting AI, which I think is a very common phenomenon all across the world. AI is a lot of times when we talk about AI with customers, it's like, and then you do your voodoo or your magic and then it happens. And it's quite understandable that people do not really trust the machine and say, well, my job is to double check the blue fields, but I'm seeing the green fields also, so I'm going to double check the green fields in order to really, really make sure that the data is 100% accurate. And even if AI is somehow magic still to a lot of people, there is, and I'm repeating myself now, there is a lot of things that you can measure in AI. And of course, you can also measure the extraction rates. Not only how much has been extracted correctly, but also how much has been extracted incorrectly. And what you're seeing here on that screen is just an example of a report within Smart Act. And it's actually a report looking into the past. And it tells you how many of the green fields where the AI says those fields have been extracted correctly and nobody has to touch them anymore, how many of those have actually still been corrected. And just focusing on the right figure here is 0.76%. So basically nothing. It's still an error rate, that's true, but it's a very low, and from our understanding, it's an acceptable error rate that every once in a while a green field is still not a correct field. But what this report proves is that there is many times that a correct field has been touched unnecessarily. There was no need doing that. It was just basically a waste of time. So by using Smart Act as a tool, you can actually prove and give hard fact numbers whether users have to touch green fields or not. And in this case, I think the answer is pretty straightforward. There is no need at all to touch those fields. But as I said, it's a very common phenomenon using AI tools that people just distrust the result. So giving that figures back to you, Katalin, what can you do in order to help people better understand the AI? What can they do to improve processing times?
I think it's a very, very useful information that we need to integrate into our training materials, that we need to use for our change management activities, explaining the colleagues what's behind AI. That's not a black box, but it's something really tangible. Now let's move to the second example before we answer the questions. I think it would help to make the story complete. Christian, you already mentioned the cost drivers. This is a screenshot from our cost driver dashboard, a quite complex picture, but I would like just to focus on the upper right corner. Here again, we see processing times, and in that case, all processing times are related to invoices from the very same vendors, but they refer to different company codes. So it means that certain vendors invoices us for different company codes. We have a lot of business with them, and obviously we handle the invoices differently. Would you have any further details for us to better understand what's behind?
Yeah, and that's again a reporting issue on the one hand, and on the other hand, and we can jump on another screenshot here. It's also what we call a cost driver element of Smart Act. Again, if you ask why is that happening? Why is a similar vendor processed with different quality and time in different regions? You have to look obviously at the regions on the one hand, how processing times evolve over time there, and how different vendors and how often different vendors actually occur, and then focus on those vendors that really have a very, very high discrepancy in their processing times across the different regions. Try to analyze the root causes for that, and you already mentioned some on the previous slide, like a different quality of invoices. And of course, there is different tax laws, different ways to present an invoice in different regions, different font types, different characters like Chinese and Spanish and German and Portuguese and Eastern Europe. So there may be a lot of reasons. But to give you the hard facts, again, just look at the reports, and they not only tell you the service levels and the processing times and the extraction rates, but it also tells you where to look at first, because it does not really make sense to optimize each and every vendor. But focusing on those large volume vendors, that makes sense, especially if there is still a huge gap in processing times. And I think that's, Katalin, that's what you probably learned by just looking at the figures, how they developed over time.
Exactly. So here we have to look at the invoices in detail, and depending on the root cause, we take different measures, either training measures with our employees, or we reach out to the vendors asking them for the same high quality of invoices for each and every company code. I have a last example. Here again, we see green and blue fields, but the background is different. In some countries, in certain cases, especially related to amounts, it seems that the system is not confident enough turning the fields into green, even if the data quality is always high. So our colleagues are asking for a mean to increase the confidence level of the algorithm so that they do not need to touch these invoices anymore, but they could process them touchless. Do you have a solution there?
And of course, the answer is yes. But let me just have a look back at the first two use cases again. When we talked about them, you explained the measures that you were taking is change management on the one hand, train people, explain people, have people on board understanding what they are doing and why they are doing it, and why they can trust AI, and also talking to vendors. Because sometimes the only real measure is talking to your main vendors and see if they can adapt to your automation goals by providing better invoices. This third and last use case of the presentation, this is a real AI and technology-driven use case. And you already said there is a lot of blue fields still. And I could show another report now saying there is a lot of blue fields where nothing has to be done. It just needs to hit enter and the field is confirmed because it was correct all the time. So what can we do to increase the level of confidence within the software? And within the questions, I already see there is some AI-related questions in there. So that's one piece of the answer here. AI has to do two things. First, it has to learn and find a way to identify the data that it needs to extract. And second, it needs to make sure that what it has extracted is actually correct, because what we don't want is a high error rate, or what we call the false positives. False positives, just remember this 0.76%. That is the rate of false positives within AP processing in Smart Invoice at BASF right now. So a very, very low percentage, and that's what we want. On the other hand, the challenge between automation and correct data is pretty difficult, because automizing, increasing the level of automation automatically means accepting more errors. So what can we do to train a model, to train a machine, to get more confident, and at the same time taking into account that there is only a certain degree, a certain percentage of errors that we do accept before we say the machine is not doing a good job anymore? And there's an approach, we call that the STP booster, which is a very cryptical name, but it's actually the straight-through processing booster. That is a retraining based on deep learning and neural networks that takes the results of Smart Invoice as they are. It combines them with an accepted error rate that you define, and then it tells you how much you can automate. And applying that STP booster technology with Smart Invoice, and you can see that on the slide. On the left hand, you see blue fields, and on the right hand, you see green fields. And the gap is bridged by this STP booster saying, I am very confident for vendor A if I extract the net amount and the VAT from what I've learned in the past, that those numbers typically are correct if there is a high enough OCR rate, of course, and if the mathematics add up, like VAT and net amount adds up to total amount and stuff like that. But this all can be learned with neural networks and deep learning approaches and algorithms. We call that the STP booster, and that, Katalin, is an answer to your question.
Thank you very much, Christian. And in fact, we are in the process of creating learning data for the STP booster for certain countries and Americas and Asia. And I am quite optimistic that we will be able to see the results at the beginning of the summer already. Now I see a question about our automation rates. And of course, we have some facts and figures for you. Just two hints. One hint is that these figures are reflecting our end-to-end process. And I wanted to emphasize this because for us in BASF, it's really, really important that we do not only focus on the Smart Invoice piece, so on the data extraction piece, but we look at the entire invoice process, so both tools that we use in accounts payable. These figures are also not one-to-one comparable with the ones that we showed last year because our portfolio has changed significantly during the last 12 months. So therefore, I just wanted to give you an impression, where do we stand right now, also reflecting the complexity and demanding portfolio that we manage in BASF. With freights, I wanted just to give you a hint that in case your portfolio is less complex, less demanding, of course, you will be able to reach quite different figures. Altogether, with that approach, using Smart Act in a very consequent way, we were able to materialize further efficiency gains. And this is very, very important. We, as mentioned, continuously seek further improvement.
And that brings us to the conclusion already. And I hope, Katalin, that you answered the question about the automation rates by now. Just looking at the figures, we can see a clear increase in the auto posting rates compared to last year's presentation. And you and I, we were joking about repeating this presentation next year, and hopefully we will see the next level and the next level. And that's what an evergreen should be about. It should not get old, it should not stop, it should just continuously improve. And when I see this slide, I'm reminded of the circle that you have presented in the beginning with the learning and the human being and the training. And actually, we see that on this slide again. It's the combination of all of that. It's, of course, the tool Smart Invoice, and we're going to answer the question about the AI in a second that has been asked. It's the people. Without the people working with the tool, you will never gain any optimization potential because they are the best feedback that you can get by complaining about always having to confirm fields or to correct fields. And then you have the tool Smart Act that measures, and just remember, you can't manage what you can't measure. So this is the measuring piece. And this combined, this leads to smart optimization. And that's what we want. And we want to continue doing that this year and next year to ever increase your auto posting rate in the end, because it's an end-to-end process. It needs to be regarded as an end-to-end process. And just improving one piece does not automatically mean that you improve the whole process, but starting in the beginning and looking at the whole process, that's the key to success. And I think with that, we're done, unless I'm wrong, but the next slide should be questions.
Mm-hmm. And we have some already in the chat. Maybe I would take the first one, Christian, if you allow me. How did the project affect procurement, especially the PO creation process? As mentioned, this is a OCR and data extraction application, and in fact, we use this also in procurement to extract data from order confirmations and advanced shipping notifications that we receive from our vendors as PDF or paper invoices. The PO creation process itself is not handled via this application.
Okay, so second question I have answered individually. I think the presentations are shared and available after the event. Mm-hmm. If not, just feel free to contact us directly and we can, of course, send the presentation. And now to the AI question, Katalin, if you allow, I will answer that because that's the insider's specialty here. The artificial intelligence element of the solution, there's a couple actually. There is like a self-learning element in there that learns by user feedback. There is a trained table extraction model in the solution that detects and extracts data out of tables in invoices, obviously. There is a pre-trained model to address an invoice as an invoice, so no needs for templates or vendor-specific extraction. It's all just covered by one approach. And the last piece we've just dealt with, that's the automation booster, the straight-through processing booster, as we call it, which is an element of deep learning, neural networks, and some fancy AI buzzwords that our development people know way better than I do. So it's a mixture as always. But AI is not the only key to this solution. It's what Katalin has just presented in three very, very, I think, easy to understand use cases. It's the constant improvement of the solution that is important. And that's always something customer specific, depending on customer needs, regions, global impact, vendors, and so on and so on.
Well, thank you so much for answering all the questions. I appreciate it. And yes, we will share the presentation with the participants who've asked for it. Absolutely. I want to thank you, Katalin and Christian, for sharing that great story with us. And I do encourage you to connect with them. I've put their contact details on the console. And please do pick up the additional content resources that Insiders Technology has provided to you.